The city was quiet when I finally shut down my workstation, the kind of silence only found 45 floors above Chicago streets at midnight. From my office window, the river reflected shards of neon, broken and restless. I told myself I'd just check one last email before heading home. That lie had kept me chained to this glass tower for more years than I cared to admit. The subject line read, "Annual Performance Bonus Confirmation." I clicked. The screen blinked once, and there it was, 080. Not delayed, not reduced 0. 12 years of building firewalls, patching code at dawn, saving launches from collapsing under federal scrutiny, and they'd tallied my worth as nothing. I stared at Derek Langford's digital signature at the bottom. Bold, almost celebratory, as though humiliating me was another performance metric. By morning, I told myself, I'd let the sting fade. I'd walk into the all-hands meeting, hold my head high, and remind myself that I was still the architect of every protocol they relied on. But when the projector lit up during Derek's quarterly pep talk, fate delivered me something colder. Somehow, my bonus email had been cued into the slides. Everyone in that auditorium watched as my name appeared beside the glowing red bonus 0.0. Laughter rippled across the rows, muffled but audible. Derek paused just long enough for me to feel the spotlight, then smiled like it was all some clever accident. "Streamlined compensation," he quipped, tapping the lectern. "Efficiency matters everywhere, doesn't it?" The chuckles grew louder. My chest tightened, but I kept my hands folded, my expression neutral. When the smirks turned toward me, I forced a smile. "Good luck," I said evenly, letting the words hang heavier than he expected. What they didn't see, what Derek didn't notice, was the line of other names that followed mine on the shared system. I wasn't the only one with a bonus reduced to nothing. Engineers, analysts, testers, people written deep into the company's launch-critical files had all been slashed to 0. My breath caught, not from the insult, but from recognition. 4 years ago, I had buried a failsafe in the master compliance code. If any critical employee received a bonus of 0, signed by an executive, the launch would lock down automatically. Looking at that string of names, I understood the truth the system wasn't armed once. It had been armed multiple times, and the countdown had already begun. I still remember the fluorescent hum of the oncology ward, how it drowned out even the sound of my own heartbeat. Ramon's hand was thin in mine, his skin cool, the strength I once leaned on slipping away hour by hour. Lucia sat in the corner of the room, 14 years old, her math homework balanced on her knees, pretending she wasn't listening to every word. "That night," Ramon whispered, "she'll need you to be both of us now." His voice cracked, and I squeezed his hand harder, as if my grip alone could anchor him. I promised him aloud what I'd already been whispering to myself for weeks, that Lucia would have a future, that she would go further than either of us had gone. College, security, a life free from the compromises we'd made. He closed his eyes and gave the faintest nod. Within days, he was gone, leaving me with grief and a mission that had no room for failure. I buried myself in work, compliance deadlines, endless coding reviews, late-night audits that bled into dawn. It didn't matter. Every hour was a brick laid for the foundation of Lucia's future. While my colleagues left for dinners or vacations, I stayed. I missed her school plays, her first driving lesson, even the championship game where she scored the winning goal. She smiled in the photos. But later, when I tucked her in, I could see the unspoken question, was it worth it? Now she's 18, her hair long like mine, her spirit sharp as Ramon's. She talks about transferring to Stanford's engineering program, her eyes glowing with the same fire he once carried when fixing an old carburetor in our garage. The tuition is a mountain, but I'd mapped every step, the bonus, the savings, the sacrifices. Until Derek, until that email with its clean, cold 0. I sat at the kitchen table last night as Lucia sorted through transfer requirements, her fingers smudged with ink. "Don't worry about the money." "Mama," she said lightly, "I can take more shifts at the bookstore. Loans aren't the end of the world." I smiled, but inside, the words cut. Derek hadn't just humiliated me, he had reached into my home, into my daughter's dreams, and stolen them with a flourish of his digital signature. And that was the moment I knew he had made a mistake too big to bury. The morning after the meeting, I went straight to my office and closed the door before anyone could catch my expression. My badge still let me through every layer of security, but I had the uneasy sense that I was already a ghost in the building. I logged into the internal archive, the place where 12 years of my life should have lived in neat, time-stamped rows. Instead, I found nothing. The patents I'd shepherded through endless revisions, the compliance audits I'd drafted line by line, the security architecture diagrams I'd stayed up nights sketching on legal pads, all of them bore a different name: Ethan Granger. Ethan was Derek's golden boy, barely 32, MBA polished to a shine, more fluent in corporate jargon than in any real code. Lead architect, the files proclaimed, as if he'd been the one losing sleep over encryption failures and international export regulations. I clicked through conference photos, my throat tightening as I saw my own image blurred, erased, or replaced altogether. In one. The keynote banner still read, "Cybersecurity by Smith," but standing at the podium was Ethan, smiling with borrowed authority. They hadn't just rewritten the reports, they'd rewritten the past. But arrogance leaves fingerprints, buried deep in the metadata, invisible to casual eyes. My initials were still there, MV Auth, stamped across version histories, unchanged because someone hadn't known where to look. Proof. Quiet, undeniable proof. They could repaint the surface, but they hadn't scraped the bones clean. That night, at home, Lucia spread the glossy company newsletter across the kitchen counter. Her face lit up at first bright photos of the Athenis grid project, the same one I'd built from the ground up. Then she frowned. "Mama, why isn't your name here?" "You did this, didn't you?" I forced a calm smile, folding the paper before her eyes lingered too long. "Names aren't what matter, Carino. The work speaks for itself." But inside, heat burned through me. They had erased me from the stage, from the record, from the very history I had written, and as I tucked the newsletter into the trash, I knew I would find a way to write myself back. 4 years ago, Derek had swept into my office with that salesman's grin he wore whenever he needed someone else to carry the weight of his promises. "Smith," he said, tossing a binder thick enough to break a wrist onto my desk. "This one's yours. Global Compliance Authentication Protocol. Don't screw it up, every launch depends on it." Most of the room thought it was busy work, another layer of paperwork to keep regulators pacified. They joked about me being buried alive under red tape. I didn't laugh. My father, an Air Force mechanic, had drilled into me that systems only work when they account for failure. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. That was the language I spoke. And if Cellcore wanted me to build the backbone of their billion-dollar empire, then I was going to design more than just paperwork. In the code, tucked behind endless logic checks and regulatory verification steps, I planted something small. A clause that would sleep quietly unless the company ever crossed a particular line. If a launch-critical employee, someone whose work kept the entire machine from collapsing, was marked with a bonus of 0, signed off by executive authority, the system would lock, not slow, not stumble. Lock, instantly and without override. It wasn't revenge when I wrote it. It was insurance. A safety valve for the people who worked through the nights while executives clinked glasses at fundraisers. My colleagues never asked what kept me hunched over the terminal after everyone else left. If they had, they would have seen the faint smile I allowed myself as I layered protection into the architecture. And because Derek's arrogance always had a way of shining brighter than anyone else's, I tethered the trigger to his clearance alone. No vice president, no director, just him. His signature would be the pin pulled from the grenade. When I finished, I sat back and thought about my father leaning over an engine block, grease on his hands, saying, "You can't stop every failure, kid, but you can make sure it doesn't take the whole plane down with it." Now, years later, staring at that bonus email, I knew Derek had just signed more than a document. He had armed the very system that would expose him. The first text arrived just after midnight, when I was sitting at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop washing over half-drunk coffee. "You built the lock. They don't know. But I do." My breath caught. The words sat on the screen like a match waiting for oxygen. I stared at them, willing the sender to reveal more, but no name followed, no number I recognized. Just silence. I deleted the message, but the unease lingered, as if some unseen eye had peered straight into the code I'd buried years ago. The next morning at the office, I scanned every passing face, wondering who might know. Derek strutted past with Ethan in tow, both of them laughing too loud, too sure of their own importance. They weren't subtle enough to send a message like that. Later that afternoon, Rosa Almeida appeared at my door with 2 coffees. She was a steady presence in the department, a woman in her early 50s with a posture that still carried the Navy. She placed a cup on my desk without asking and studied me for a long moment. "You've been quieter than usual," she said. "I'm just tired," I answered, testing her with vagueness. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Tired's one word for it. Some of us remember when you built the backbone of this place. Hard to forget the look on your face back then, like you knew you were laying down more than compliance rules." I didn't reply. My silence was deliberate. She leaned in just enough for her words to land softly. "When systems fail, people remember who built them." Then she straightened, sipped her coffee, and left without waiting for a response. The air in my office felt heavier after she was gone. Friend or threat, I couldn't tell. That night, I came home to find Lucia asleep on her textbooks, her phone alarm buzzing beside her. She'd been covering extra shifts at the bookstore, eyes red from exhaustion, hands ink-stained from notes. I pulled the blanket over her shoulders when she stirred, whispering about tuition. I pressed a kiss to her hair. "I'll handle it, cariño. Focus on your studies." I said it softly, but inside I knew the clock was already ticking toward a moment none of them could stop. By the time launch week arrived, Cellcore had transformed itself into a circus. Banners lined every hallway Athena's grid. The 2.9B future. Countdown clocks glowed on every floor, their relentless numbers ticking away like a drumbeat no one could ignore. Even the coffee mugs were stamped with the launch date, as though caffeine alone could carry people through exhaustion. The offices smelled of old takeout and stale energy drinks. Sleeping bags appeared under desks, and I stepped over more than one intern curled on the carpet with a hoodie for a pillow. Their eyes were bloodshot, their voices hoarse. But Derek paraded through the chaos with film crews at his heels. Cameras followed him as he patted shoulders and delivered sound bites about pioneering the next era of innovation. He was careful to stop near the haggard-looking teams, tilting his head just right for the lights, making their suffering part of his image. Every clip would show him as the visionary shepherding loyal employees toward destiny. No one filmed the interns who fainted or the engineers shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. I spent my hours in the compliance control room, the only corner of the building quiet enough to hear myself think. On the wall, a massive screen showed the countdown, glowing red in the dim light. 10 days, 5 days, 3 days. Each tick felt less like progress and more like inevitability. I sat in the back, silent, watching the timer and waiting for gravity to take hold. One afternoon, as I refilled my mug, I caught the voices of 2 managers by the coffee station. "We've tested every sequence," one whispered, "but that final authentication protocol, nobody's touched it since Marina built it. Should we get someone to review it?" the other asked. "Review what she's the only one who understands how it works." And we're out of time. They lowered their voices further. But I'd heard enough. My name, buried under months of erasure, still lingered where it mattered most. I returned to the control room, the corners of my mouth tightening into the closest thing to a smile I'd allowed in weeks. The clock was still ticking, and soon it would strike 0. The night before the launch, the city glowed like a field of embers. From my apartment window, Lake Michigan stretched out in the dark, rippling under the streetlights that curved along the shore. I sat with a glass of water untouched beside me, staring at my reflection in the glass. Justice or revenge, the line between them blurred as easily as the waves dissolving into one another. The system I had built wasn't born of anger. It was insurance, a safeguard against arrogance. But tomorrow, when the clock hit 0, that insurance would look an awful lot like revenge, and I wasn't sure anymore if there was a difference. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. It was Lucia. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Mom, do you ever regret it? All those nights you stayed late? All the games you missed? The dinners we didn't share?" I closed my eyes, the memories pressing in her recitals, her laughter echoing in an empty apartment, the glow of my laptop always brighter than the lamp on our kitchen table. "Not if it buys your future," I whispered. The silence on the line was long, but when she finally answered, there was no anger, only a quiet understanding. "I believe you, Mama." After we hung up, I returned to my desk, meaning to review old files one last time. Instead, an email pinged into my inbox. From Rosa. "When the lock activates, stand tall. Don't hide. Let them know who really built this." I read it twice, my pulse steady but sharp. She knew, maybe not every detail, but enough. She had pieced together what the others couldn't. And instead of running to Derek, instead of warning the executives, she had written to me, not as a threat, but as preparation. I leaned back, folding my arms across my chest. The failsafe would speak tomorrow whether I wanted it to or not. But Rosa was right, systems weren't enough. People needed a face to tie to the truth. Outside, the city hummed with restless energy, but in my apartment the air was still. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise. And this time, I wouldn't be erased. The auditorium gleamed like a cathedral built for profit. Banners stretched across the walls, promising the 2.9B future. Spotlights swept the crowd of investors, politicians, and foreign delegates. Rows of reporters filled every seat, cameras already fixed on the stage. Derek strutted to the podium, his voice booming through the speakers. "Today, Cellcore changes everything," he declared, pausing to bask in applause. Ethan sat at the front, nervous smile plastered on his face, trying to look like a man who belonged there. I stood at the back, unseen, hands folded. The countdown clock loomed over us all, each digit falling like the second hand of a bomb. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The screens flickered, then they bled red. An alarm tone cut through the music, sharp enough to slice the air. Words scrolled across every display in bold white letters. License invalidation. Bonus. $0 triggered by executive signature. For a heartbeat, silence held. The kind where no one breathes because no one can comprehend what they're seeing. Then the room erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Investors barked into headsets. Engineers rushed to terminals, pounding keys that couldn't undo what had been written years before. The stock ticker on the sidewall spun downward, green numbers flipping crimson faster than anyone could count. Derek's voice cracked through the chaos. "Restart the system, roll back the files." His perfect composure shredded into rage as his empire slipped through his fingers, and then my second switch flipped. The projectors stuttered once more, this time dumping the metadata logs across every screen. Timestamps, author lines, version histories all stamped with the same initials M. Smith. My name. spread across the walls like a signature too bold to erase. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan's face drained of color as his borrowed credit dissolved in real time. Then a vice president's voice rang out, raw and unfiltered. She warned us years ago. Cameras swiveled, lenses locking onto the back row where I stood. For the first time in years. I didn't hide. I let their eyes find me. Flashes strobed, capturing Derek's humiliation and my quiet presence in the same frame. The system had spoken, and it had spoken with my name. The control room door slammed so hard the glass rattled. Derek burst in, his tie undone, his hair damp with sweat, the polished armor he wore for cameras stripped away. He held a crumpled printout of my bonus confirmation in his fist like it was evidence of a crime. "You did this!" he shouted, slamming the paper against my desk. His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the rage. I looked at the page, then at him. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "No, Derek, you did. You signed it." For a moment he just stared, as though he couldn't quite process the truth. His arrogance had been the weapon, his signature the trigger. I didn't need to raise my voice. The system had already delivered my verdict. Outside the door, the chaos of the auditorium spilled in. Reporters jeered, investors shouted into phones, alarms still pulsed through the air. Through the thin walls, I heard a journalist mockingly repeat Derek's favorite phrase. "Good luck." Laughter followed, bitter and merciless. His catchphrase turned against him in the moment of his collapse. I slipped my laptop into my bag, zipped it shut, and stood. Derek tried to block the door, but I walked past him, brushing his shoulder as if he were nothing more than a shadow in the hallway. The empire he had built on lies was crumbling piece by piece, and I had no reason to stay to watch the wreckage. Lucia was waiting just beyond the lobby, her eyes wide, face pale. When she saw me, she exhaled hard, relief rushing out of her. Without a word, I took her hand, and together we walked through the glass doors as flashbulbs burst behind us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. Months later, the headlines had faded. Lucia opened an envelope at our kitchen table, tears springing into her eyes, a full scholarship to Stanford. I wrapped her in my arms, the promise I'd made to Ramon finally fulfilled. By then, Smith Protocols was already gaining clients, companies who wanted integrity instead of vanity. I ran it my way. No exploitation, no erasures, no forgotten names. As for Derek, rumors whispered he was toiling at a fledgling startup in Austin, stripped of prestige, surrounded by silence instead of cameras. Sometimes revenge isn't sabotage, it's letting arrogance collapse under its own weight. And if another empire ever tried the same trick, well, I'd already proven I knew how to write endings.